Two critical races here for governor and for Senate. Let's first look at these brand new numbers from CNN in a new poll conducted by SSRS in the gubernatorial contest between Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum and Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis. Take a look at this. We are showing among likely voters a 12-point advantage for Gillum, 54% to 42%. Now, I want to say this does not look like other polls that we've seen in this race. This is a bigger Gillum advantage. It's worth noting that every poll in this race since the primary in August has shown Gillum leading. So I have little doubt that he's leading. The question here is he leading by that much? Will this poll be an outlier, or will, as we see successive polls, will we see a big Gillum advantage? A month ago, Quinnipiac University had him at a 9-point lead. We have him today in a 12-point lead among likely voters. It's hard to imagine. Florida hasn't elected a Democratic governor in a quarter century, and when it last did so in 1994, the Democrat won by 1.5 points. This is still a big purple state, but that is a big Democratic advantage, which speaks to the enthusiasm that we're seeing on the Democratic side. Take a look at the race according to the gender gap, and I think this helps explain why we're seeing such a big Gillum lead in this poll. Look at that. 60% of women are going for Gillum. That is a 26-point advantage over DeSantis. And when you look at men, you see that DeSantis only has a 7-point advantage among men over Gillum. So that overwhelming support from women is having an impact here. And take a look at the governor's race broken down by party. You see here that Gillum has consolidated basically every Democrat in the state. That is mostly the case for DeSantis. But you see Gillum winning independents here by 9 points among likely voters, and that is also likely driving him over the top in a big way.
Well, those are really encouraging numbers for Gillum, but then what about the Florida Senate race?
Florida Senate race, we are also seeing that Democratic enthusiasm that we're seeing nationally play out here as well. We show among likely voters in this poll a race that is within the margin of error and will likely remain so, but has Nelson on top with 50% to Governor Rick Scott's 45% among likely voters. You should also take a look at the gender gap here. You see that Nelson is winning women by about 16 points here, while Scott is winning men by about half as much. He's winning men by 8 points. So again, a big female-powered moment here in the electorate in Florida. And if you look at the race by the issues, I find this so fascinating. Among those likely voters, Fred, who tell us that health care is their top issue, overwhelmingly they are Nelson voters. If you look at the voters who tell us that the economy is their top issue, they are overwhelmingly Rick Scott voters, who boasts of big job growth here during his tenure as governor. And immigration also plays, you see, into Scott's favor here in Florida, and that is another important issue in the state. I will say Donald Trump has a 43% approval rating in this state among likely voters, and there's also, though he's behind in the poll, more good news for Rick Scott in this poll. He gets very good marks on how he handled the Hurricane Michael situation that hit this state.
What we certainly see is enthusiasm among Democrats. Now, that's not surprising. That's something, Frederica, we expected to see, certainly at this point in the race. Now, we can look at this poll in a couple of ways. One is that it is accurately grabbing the enthusiasm at a time when we see Democrats coming together as a party. Another way you can look at it is that this is one of these statistical outliers that randomly happen when you do polling. Right now is forget about the numbers. Let's assume that this race is a lot tighter than what those numbers are, and I think that is a more accurate way to describe where we are right now. We know both candidates are campaigning very hard. Tonight's debate is going to be their opportunity not only to face themselves for the first time ever, they've never met, but to make their case to the Florida voters. And even though this is a race here in Florida, Fred, we all know that this has major national implications in it with the national surrogates involved, including President Trump, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Hillary Clinton, and others.
Oh, it does indeed, not just for that governor's race, but of course, you know, eyes on the Senate race there in Florida, too, right. Where you've got an incumbent, you know, up against, a former governor. And what makes that and why is that one so tight?
Well, I'll tell you what, Fred, we talk about these two gentlemen. We'll see debate tonight, more on the younger side of the political spectrum, really starting to meet themselves tonight. However, We know that Rick Scott and Bill Nelson know each other very well. They've spent a lot of time in Florida politics opposing each other on just about everything. And right now we see them with Rick Scott trailing Bill Nelson again in this poll. But it could be one of these situations where we see Democratic enthusiasm, or it could be one of those situations where it's an outlier. But regardless, we do know that this race is extremely tight. Again, very nasty race between these two men right now. In fact, they were supposed to debate on CNN, and in fact, they couldn't come to any kind of way to do that. So, Fred, right now, ground zero when it comes to politics, when it comes to the midterm elections, no better place to be than where we are standing right now in Tampa, Florida.
Right, and when it comes down to the issues, that are really driving or are of interest to voters, they're very similar to what we're seeing across the country. Healthcare is important. Immigration is something else, and of course the economy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. When you look at Florida, too, you can almost look at Florida as a microcosm of the United States, because you have down in South Florida, you have a lot of immigration, Cuban influence, Hispanic influence down there. Well, you move up the coast and there's different influences, different topography, different kinds of industry and what have you. So you're absolutely right. Healthcare, the economy, immigration, all on the top of the minds of Floridians. And I got to tell you, this is one of these states, one of these races where everybody in the state really seems to be tuned into, Fred.
Right, and we just saw, former Vice President Joe Biden, who was campaigning in Nevada yesterday. Apparently, he will be stumping for Bill Nelson in Florida coming up as well. Mark Preston, thank you so much. Appreciate it.